What's going on, guys? This is Sam, and two new huge reports just dropped on the future of iOS 12 and even iOS 13. There is so much to talk about. A lot of new features have been leaked, so let's go ahead and jump in. We'll start off with iOS 12 because that's coming in 2018, and then move on to iOS 13 coming in 2019 a little bit later. And generally, we don't hear about new iOS features until much farther down the road, in April or May, much closer to Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, or WWDC. That is not the case this year. We saw two new reports today, one from Axios, one from Bloomberg, detailing some general observations about what they're hearing Apple will be doing with iOS 12, and Bloomberg actually shared a number of specific details, which are pretty exciting. The general consensus between the two reports, the number one thing that they definitely both agreed on, is that iOS 12 is not going to be a big update. This update is going to be focused on stability and performance over everything else. And while there will be new features, there are going to be new changes. It's not going to be the exact same as iOS 11, but more stable. There will not be a focus on new features and changes like Apple's done in the past with iOS 10 and iOS 11. A really good comparison made in the Bloomberg article is that this is similar to what Apple has done in the past. If you remember iOS 7 and iOS 8, those were super similar to iOS 11. They were pretty big changes, they changed a lot at one time, and they were buggy throughout their release year. And then iOS 9 came along and corrected a lot of these issues. I think iOS 9 was really well received. It was when they first added the big multitasking gestures, or the start of multitasking gestures and productivity features for the iPad. It was a smaller update in general, we didn't see that much, and overall it was so much more stable than what we saw with iOS 10 when a decent amount changed, and iOS 11 when even more changed. And the good news here is that Apple's been listening. This is a company that generally doesn't listen to a lot of consumer feedback. They'll ask for feedback from time to time, but generally Apple does what Apple thinks is best. But they've heard our complaints. They've heard people say iOS 11 is unquestionably buggy. We don't want this. We would rather have stability and good performance over new features, and that is exactly what Apple's going to be doing with iOS 12 in 2018. Near the end of 2017, we heard our first iOS 12 rumor from Bloomberg, and they stated that Apple will be working on cross-platform third-party apps for 2018 across iOS 12 and macOS, and that feature was not cut. That still should be making its debut at WWDC 2018 when it's expected that iOS 12 will be announced. And the reactions to this rumor were quite interesting. Some people were extremely excited, totally ready for this to happen. The idea of being able to develop one app for iPhone and then also port it to the Mac in a really easy way for developers sounded pretty appealing, but at the same time, some people questioned the quality of the software, how it would work transferring touch input to like a keyboard and mouse. We don't know all the details on that just yet, and from here on out I want to combine both the reports as if they were one, because more or less they're saying and suggesting the same things. So first up, we're expecting to see a new multiplayer mode launch for augmented reality apps in iOS 12 that would allow players to interact in augmented reality with other players either near them or probably around the globe as well, and play games in augmented reality. Augmented reality is something that I was really excited for when we first saw it. I made a number of videos, I'll link up in the top right hand corner of the screen, talking about the apps that I was most excited to see, but in all honesty, I haven't really used it since iOS 11 has been out. For me, it's been more of a gimmick than anything else, but Apple genuinely and sincerely and continues to reiterate that they believe in the future of augmented reality and that they're going to continue developing things for iOS and probably for macOS and other platforms in the future that reflect that view. Like in iOS 12, we should be seeing a multiplayer mode for augmented reality games, which honestly is more exciting. It will definitely freshen up the platform after it's been out for a year. And regardless of whether you're into augmented reality or not, I think multiplayer gaming is a good idea. That's a really great way to drive app downloads, because if you can play with friends, it's arguably always going to be more fun than playing solo. So we should be seeing that in iOS 12. This next one is pretty broad, but Apple is rumored to continue working on improvements to the Health app. We've seen this in iOS 11.3 and iOS 11.0. In iOS 11.3 specifically, Apple has introduced this new health records feature that allows you to store and sync your medical records with a number of hospitals and clinics around the nation. It's a really good solution for a problem that a lot of people have, where you go into a doctor's office to physically get your medical records, but you can't really carry them on the phone. If you had an option to just sync up your personal medical records without leaving your home with a specific hospital or clinic, that'd be pretty revolutionary because I don't have easy access to my medical records. A lot of other people in the world don't have easy access to their medical records, and to get information, it can be really challenging sometimes. So I'm a huge fan of this addition in iOS 11.3, and rumors suggest that in iOS 12, Apple will continue to refine and add more features to the Health app. Moving on to more features in iOS 12, this is actually one that Apple has confirmed is coming in the future, and that is an expanded set of parental controls, so parents can more easily monitor the screen on time, the app usage time of what their kids are doing on their smart devices. This one comes as a result of, I think, a shareholder calling Apple out for the lack of really good parental controls on iOS, but I would argue that Apple's parental controls are a lot better than other platforms. You can lock down pretty much every aspect of the phone, but it looks like in iOS 12 they will be introducing more specific features to monitor app time, monitor screen on time, to really know how much that kid or that child is interacting with the device. Moving on to our next iOS 12 rumor, we're hearing that FaceTime video calling could be seeing some improvements, and the first thing I think about when I hear that is group FaceTime. This is a feature that I have wanted forever, that a lot of you I think have wanted forever, but something that we haven't seen. And I was reading on the Apple subreddit the other day, apparently a reason that Apple can't implement it or hasn't implemented it yet is because a patent troll filed a suit against Apple, and for legal reasons they can't implement group FaceTime. That's what I read. A number of people on the subreddit were saying that. I don't know if that's entirely true. All I know is that group FaceTime would be incredible. I would love to see that in iOS 12. It's something that we heard was rumored for iOS 11, but that never ended up happening. So maybe Apple pushed that back a year. Maybe we will see it in iOS 12. Or maybe we won't see it at all because there's a legal issue preventing that from happening. Moving on to our last couple of rumors for iOS 12, we're hearing that there could be some small improvements inside of the Photos app. Once again, it's ambiguous. We don't know what it means. We don't know if there will be larger changes, really tiny changes somewhere between, or if we'll even see change at all. Once again, it's very early. Plans could change. And the last rumor that we're hearing for iOS 12 right now is that Apple is working to make iOS feel more responsive on the iPhone, because when you update an older iPhone to the latest version of iOS, it's obviously not going to run as well as the newest iPhone on iOS 12 Beta 1. If you run that on an iPhone 10, it's going to be great. If you run that on an iPhone 6S or an iPhone 7, it's going to be a little bit slower. So I'm glad to see that Apple is working on all these improvements. So that's everything we know about iOS 12 right now. It's going to be a smaller update focused on stability and bug fixes and performance. But we've heard that some things got pushed back, some really big changes that I wish we'd be seeing this year, but that Apple has postponed until sometime in 2019, likely with iOS 13. I know it's really early to be talking about iOS 13, but we actually have a decent amount of information about this update already. The biggest change we should expect to see in iOS 13 is a redesigned home screen, and this is a feature that is logical at this point. iOS and the home screen has looked identical since the first iPhone. In 2007 on iPhone OS 1, the apps on the home screen, they've gotten a little bit bigger over time. You've been able to put more icons on the home screen, but the size, the way they look, has remained identical. And in 2019 with iOS 13, Apple is said to be working on a redesigned UI for the home screen and CarPlay, because that has a very similar interface to the home screen on the iPhone right now. This is one of those features that I've wanted to see for years now. I don't have any problem with the current iOS home screen. It's definitely functional over anything else. It's really easy to use. But it's stale, it's boring, it's remained the same since 2007, and it is unquestionably time for something new. I'm really disappointed that we won't be seeing that in 2018, but at the same time, I'd rather have a solid experience than something filled with bugs and glitches, similar to what we saw with iOS 11. I want to hear your thoughts on this down below. Are you excited for this new home screen UI? We don't know anything about it, we don't know how it's going to work, we don't know if it will be live or static, we don't know if we'll see different icons, if the shape of icons will change. There's a lot of things that I can think of in my head. Widgets are a big thing that have been on Android for a long time. I guess those could possibly be coming to iOS 12. All we know for sure is that in 2019 or at some point in the future, Apple was working on a home screen feature, a home screen refresh for iOS 12, but they've delayed that until 2019 with iOS 13. It's disappointing that we would have been seeing this in just a couple of months at WWDC launch as a feature in iOS 12, but because of all the issues with iOS 11, I think Apple's made the right choice here. Push this feature back. It sounds like it will be the biggest change to the home screen in the history of the home screen, so rather than having it filled with bugs and glitches and shipping a half-baked piece of software, which some would argue is how iOS 11 shipped, shift, just focus on core stability and performance and bug fixes, and I think the end users will be more happy that way. Some other things that have gotten delayed are some core app upgrades. These could ship with iOS 12 in 2018 later this year at WWDC, but more likely or possibly they'll be delayed until 2019 in iOS 13. If Apple does in fact call it iOS 13, then it sounds weird to keep going up version over version every year. I feel like they'll have to change up that naming scheme eventually. And alongside core app upgrades, there's a new algorithm that Apple's working on in the Photos app for sorting photos. Mark Gurman at Bloomberg has said that that has also been delayed until probably some point in the future in 2019 or with iOS 13. So that's everything that we know about Apple's software plans for the future. I'm excited for both iOS 12 and iOS 13. I didn't anticipate for iOS 12 to be such a small release, and we're still 3 or 4 months out from iOS 12 being unveiled. Apple could definitely put in the work to make it stable and secure and improve performance while adding new features at the same time, but it's not looking like iOS 12 is going to be that bombshell iOS 11-like release where we get loads of new features across the entire operating system. At the same time, while we're not getting new features, it looks like we're going to be getting something really stable with great performance and very few bugs right off the gate. So I want to ask you if you think that's the right decision. Do you think Apple should focus on performance and stability and bugs, or should they add a ton of new features and have more bugs in iOS than we would like? I think I'm starting to fall on this side more and more. While I love new features, while I love covering that stuff, while I love talking about it, that's pretty much the basis of this channel. Performance is an issue for a lot of people on iOS 11, and stability is an issue, and there have been so many bugs and security flaws in iOS 11 that shouldn't have been there objectively in the first place. So I think Apple's making the right decision with iOS 12. I just can't wait to see that redesigned home screen coming with iOS 13 in 2019. One last thing that I want to make note of before wrapping up this video is that Apple only really plans to focus on less features and more behind the scenes changes for iOS 12. macOS 12.14 will have more security and more stability and more performance focuses to some extent, but watchOS and tvOS will be unaffected. That was something important to note. So if you're excited for a lot of new changes inside of tvOS and watchOS, those changes should be coming. So if you enjoyed watching this video, it does help me out if you take just 1 second to drop a like down below, and of course hit subscribe for more videos like this in the future. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can head over to iupdateos.com/merch, buy a t-shirt or hoodie. That would be incredible. Use code iOS for 10% off. And for now, I've been Sam. Hope all of you are doing great, and I will talk to you in my next video.